Welcoming everybody into NFL Draft Bible State of Football, day 4 of our daily series on this week. Ryan Roberts, Rising Draft, bringing you everything and anything you guys need to know, college football, NFL draft, everything that's happening with COVID-19, the implications of our season. Are we going to have a season? I want to invite what I think is one of the best panels I could be a part of, a plethora of NFL, CFL experience here. John Murphy first, VP of Player Personnel for the Toronto Argonauts. John, I know that there is a decision that's going to be made soon in the CFL. Before we get, I'm sure we're going to talk about that a bunch, but before I do, man, welcome you to the show again. How's everything today? I know you said the storm might be rolling in sometime yesterday for you.
Awesome. So I think it probably got the worst of it was down in the States, and so it doesn't seem like we're getting much, and nice to see that the three of us did not opt out of today's show.
We're not. Rick Ferratello is not with us today. He did opt out for today. He'll be back tomorrow, ending the week the way it should be. David Turner with me as well, former NFL, CFL executive scout, owner of Maverick Sports Consulting, director of player personnel for A&C Combines, and my partner every Friday night on Friday Night Scout School. David, I saw you got some nice beauty sleep this morning, my friend. How are we doing?
Yeah, we rose up a little late, but I'm here and I'm in my seat, ready to go, baby. It's a bright, beautiful day. It actually is my daughter's 7th birthday, so we're gonna grind this out. Then we're gonna go get some ice cream in this afternoon. So I'm pumped.
Nice. What's the ice cream of choice, David?
Ooh, you know what? I usually go double scoop. Okay, do chocolate chip and Rocky Road. Double scoop.
I shouldn't expect anything different. That's a little off the wall. I like it, though. It's a good way to start. And the new man on the panel, we've had him on, obviously, in the past during the draft shows. Good friend, Dane Vandernat, NFLPA Collegiate Bowl Scouting Director, former Director of Pro Personnel for the Oakland Raiders. Dane, welcome to the show, man. Appreciate you being on with us today.
No, hey, appreciate you guys' time, man. It's good to see everybody. Dave, congrats on the daughter's birthday, man.
Thank you, Dane. Appreciate that, buddy.
Yeah, man. Good to see an old Raider face there in Dave Turner.
I know. Well, it's like John Murphy, Dane, and me all had our time at the Raiders in our own capacities. And I'm the old man of the group. John and I connected there. And Dane, I was in the building when he walked in, and then he rose up to the pro director after I left and got out the door. So it's going to be like catching up with old friends here today. And obviously Ryan and I, we do our show every week together. So, I'm in a good, comfortable place today.
Yeah, it's Raider Nation,
man. Always fun to watch you guys.
Well, Dane, I wanted to start with you today because we have a lot of topics to get to. I've heard, David's, John's, Rick's perspective on everything that's going on. Obviously, we talk about, I think, the most recent 56 players testing positive for COVID. There's been 60 opt-outs, I believe. It may have risen since yesterday. Today, obviously, is the deadline, 4 p.m. Eastern time. So just make some sense of this, Dane. I'm going to ask a loaded question here, man. It is a weird world, NFL-wise. What is happening right now in the NFL landscape?
Well, first of all, I hope no one's taking Rick's commentary seriously at all. But it's always just an outlandish voice that I love to hear in the back. So the Miss Rick today, man, caught up with him a little bit before the show, but always excited to get back on here. And you know what? I mean, I absolutely echo everything you say, Ryan. It is a crazy world we're living in. I think there are 10,000 more questions than there are answers for everybody right now. And so many things need to happen. But, when you're talking about player opt-outs, I completely understand where they're coming from. Being a newly minted father, I've got concerns about being out and taking any unnecessary risk myself. So I can understand for the guys that have families and young children at home, or maybe even susceptible elders that they're close to, for deciding to make a health decision for their families. But it is an interesting time, man. And I think that every NFL team is walking through this landscape very carefully as well, hoping that they can kind of keep everything contained and, be able to proceed cautiously. You saw the Raiders yesterday announce that, they kind of went through a little bit of an act and told the team that John Gruden had COVID and wanted to see how the guys would react and kind of really stress the dire situation that the whole league's in. And I think it extends beyond the league, obviously much more down to college football, which I'm not trying to be negative Nancy over here, but it seems a lot more volatile than even the NFL. So it is an interesting time, and a lot of questions need to be answered here in the next few weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're going to try to at least answer the questions. Not that we're huge decision makers here, but we want to definitely dive into some of these topics, these questions. I applaud everybody that's on the live so far watching. We have the chat option, so if you want to drop a question in the chat, we will be able to take some live questions. We answered a couple yesterday. So, John, going over to you, I'm not too well versed in the John Gruden news here. Is this something that has happened in the past where they just want to test to see how the players react? Is that something that's off the wall? Do you think that that's a good strategic way to see just how this situation could be handled, how people are going to react?
I hope you better know the temperature of your room ahead of time, because if a bunch of guys started getting up and cheering, you got the wrong person as your head coach. So, you got to be careful what you're saying, and how you're doing it. It's understandable, like everyone's going to take a different approach, to things. As Dane had mentioned, you see at the college football level where kids are opting out based on their draft status. Other guys being a lot more willing to talk about things that they've never been willing to talk about before in terms of conditions or, whether it really is about the kids and their safety, or as we mentioned the other day, the kicker from Eastern Kentucky saying, hey, really what they care about is $1 million payoff that they have, at the beginning of the season against West Virginia, right? And then you saw, I think in the last 24 hours, they started an investigation at Colorado State to say, were people undermining, the reporting, part of the process. All of those things, like you should not assign or look to assign blame in any of those scenarios, because we know that all of those things are similar to things we would have heard and seen at any level of pro sports, in the past, 20 years. Right now, it's just something that you can't do it. If you want to get through your season, if you want to make sure that you can play and have everybody be safe, you're going to have to kind of stick to all these protocols, even if it costs you playing a game without your best people. Even if as an organization, like I mentioned, if you've sat here for 5 or 6 months waiting for this, and in the last 12 hours, you get 3 starters who opt out, you better go, find your Jerry Tarkanian rag and, calm down on it and, kind of suck it up. Because I think if you go outside of that and in the media, you show negativity toward the players, it's going to kind of stick to you and your organization down the road. The next time there's free agency or the next time guys are making decisions, that's always going to keep coming up of how you handled this situation. I think you're going to have to kind of suck it up like the Patriots and just look at it as a unique opportunity for other guys to step up and then have the understanding that behind the scenes, people are going to give you a pass. If 8 or 10 of your guys end up opting out, you're going to get a little bit of a pass behind the scenes. But when it comes down to it, you better figure out how to win on Sunday.
And David, we have the opt-out scheduled for 4 p.m. Eastern time. So it looks like we might start to get at least a little bit more answers, potentially, at least the right direction to find these answers. What's the flurry going to look like? Because we've seen a bunch of opt-outs. They've kind of been spaced out a little bit. I imagine there might be some heavy traffic for those announcements today. Are you expecting a big influx of people opting out today?
I don't think you're going to see like 200 players opt out today or anything like that. I mean, can you see another 5 to 10? Yeah, you can. But I think, with 56 players testing positive out of the 2,600, that's about 2% of the players that are actually in camp, right, that are testing positive. So, if they were going to leave, they would probably have left by now. And the other part of it is retirement. I mean, again, this is a thing that, like, when we start getting into the season, let's not look at opt-out. Let's just look at retirement numbers, because some of the older players that are worried about their health and stuff are giving it a chance in training camp. They're going to see how it goes. But once games start happening and cases start growing, because like we're seeing in baseball, travel goes up, the risk factors and how it gets into your building go up. And once that starts happening, you could wind up seeing players just file retirement papers, and there's nothing the NFL could do about it. I mean, we've seen players retire at halftime, right? So it's just like you can't do anything about it. I mean, yeah, you call it an opt-out now. Okay, but what if I just retire? You know, I mean, what are you going to do about it? Or if I'm, 3 games into the season and, I don't like the way the protocols are now doing because people are starting to get more relaxed. The NC2A just came out with I'm sorry, it was Major League Baseball came out with new rules today for their staffs. Like, hey, if you do this, there's major violations. We're going to be fining people bigger because people aren't wearing masks. I mean, I watched the Diamondbacks game the other night. There were people that were not wearing masks in the dugout. There were pitchers not wearing masks in the warm-up bullpen, and they're standing next to other people that are wearing masks. Well, again, why aren't you wearing your mask? And they're seeing this stuff on TV, and I think there's some public backlash. So therefore, they're starting to come up with stricter rules to get people to abide. Again, as you go through things, people sometimes get more relaxed on stuff. So as the season goes, I'm going to see and watch how people react to that. The other point I wanted to make to Murphy, he brought up the Colorado State article, and I thought that was a great article. One point in there was players are less likely to report their symptoms because they're worried about their play time getting reduced or something, and or looking weak, because it's a mentality, right, Dane? You don't want to look weak in the locker room. So sometimes we see players don't report their concussions right away, and then the concussion gets worse on the next series. Like they might get a little ding, come off field, like, oh, I'll be all right, go out to the next series, and then bam, they hit again, and the concussion got way worse. They don't report the injury, the initial injury, onset of injury. So here we might start seeing people not report the initial onset of feeling sick, and maybe the temperature hasn't risen. And in the college ranks, what are they doing? They can't test guys as they walk in the building every day like they can in the NFL to really know if the person has COVID or not. So I think that's a really strong thing to think about, a really good point to think about that Murphy brought up, with the college being a lot different than the pros as we move forward in this thing.
Yeah, and Dave, I mean, pardon me, Ryan, for interjecting here, but I think you make some great points there. Really, both you guys do. And I think that with college's inability to test at the same rate that the NFL collectively can, I think is really impairing these programs, both collectively as a conference as well as individually as teams. Because, I mean, let's be honest, most college football programs lose money. So for especially the non-Power 5 conferences and their schools, it's another added obstacle to overcome now, as far as coming up with the resources just to get these guys the testing that's going to be required to potentially keep them safe. In addition to, any outstanding or new protocols that have been put in place. So when you look at the Pac-12 players' demands, when you look at the Big 12 or Big 10, player demands from yesterday, I think you see a lot of concern over the protocols. But, you bring up another interesting point, Dave, in players' reluctance to report injuries and ailments that would impair their play time or their availability. As we all know, if you're trying to get drafted, the best way to get drafted is to have good tape. The best way to get drafted and to make an impression for an NFL team is to be on the field. And that's why, I remember always talking with my old colleague, Vaughn Hutchins, that oftentimes players are willing to sacrifice their head because you get a concussion, okay, that's one game. But if you get a knee injury, that could be your career, if not at least a season. So guys are much more willing to throw their head around despite the long-term risks than they are their lower body extremity, because that could be more damaging to their immediate kind of short-term success. So when it comes to COVID, if players are sitting here, and obviously we all know a lot of Americans are sitting there saying, well, I'm young, so I don't need to wear a mask. I don't need to social distance. It's not going to affect me even if I do catch the virus. Are they going to be willing to maybe not even take unnecessary risk, but if they do contract it, are they going to be as forthcoming as maybe they ought to be?
And I think that is a real scenario, and it's real life now, because if we do have a football season, we have an NFL season, and there is some of that behind the scenes stuff that's happening, obviously there is a bigger potential for spreading the illness, right? And we talked about that. And I think that's one of the big concerns for me personally. And John, I'll go over to you on this one. If we have a season, we start an NFL season, and then let's say after the second game, there's a huge influx of positive tests on a league-wide basis. How detrimental is it for the NFL and maybe on a team-to-team basis to have to squash it for now, to have to push it back or have to completely axe the entire season? How detrimental is that for the league in general?
Well, I think what you started to see, we mentioned the other day, so the Saints have operated under the thing of, for the beginning of training camp, they have the option, if you want to go into what they are considering a safe bubble, type scenario. So you could go to practice, be staying downtown at the hotel, and everything you're doing is at that point sort of as safe as possible. Now the Buccaneers have kind of jumped in on that, but are you going to get a veteran group of guys who have wives, have kids, have lives? Are they going to be willing to, all jump in there and do that? It was unlikely with baseball, so it's probably unlikely with football, unless they make it be more, more willingness to kind of, give the guys a little bit of operating space there, with things. But then you're talking about from thousands of people to tens of thousands of people. If you start adding in and saying like, hey, if you did this scenario, well, now Dane is coming with 2 or 3 and I'm coming with 3. And Turner's coming with, you start adding that up, and every team, like, that becomes too big of a bubble, to kind of handle. But it'd be very interesting to see the dynamic of how different players and how different people respond to stuff, right? Raheem Mostert yesterday basically said when he's gone, he's out. Like, in other words, he's in the season, his wife and his, first child and their to-be child coming on the way, he's going to basically social distance for them from the season because he doesn't feel comfortable enough to be interacting, where he's at for work purposes and then being around them. So that's a very, interesting decision that's made by one person. How will others respond, whether it's to do those type of things or will they jump in, and do that? Because I think, you could surprisingly then see, like we're seeing in baseball, could this then be, not only survival of the fittest, but what organization has the depth in coaching and administration in different areas to withstand something like this? Because it would appear much like baseball. Once you start, they're going to play. And they're going to play all the way down to if the Super Bowl is the Jets against the Argonauts. You know what I'm saying? Like, it seems like they're going to play whatever 2 teams are left standing, you're gonna keep playing. So, it's sort of an interesting, way to look at things, especially when you're saying we're gonna play in the fall. That's what everybody in the back of their mind has been hesitating and waiting for is, okay, once these temperatures start changing again, is all that science correct? Is there some kind of second wave or another, uptick in this again? And you're going to be playing NFL games in all these different places with travel, with 60, 80 guys at least in the building, even if you're doing a bunch of Zoom calls, and social distancing for practice. And I don't mean blowing coverages. I mean, social distancing for practice. It's going to get interesting, to see if you can pull this off, and get through a whole regular season in the NFL.
And David, I think you're about to chime in. Did you have a point that you wanted to make?
Well, I was going to say that's a really interesting point, Murph, because as you said, if all the science is correct and we're going to have another upswing, across the world, not just here in America, how do you protect? I mean, the flu, certain people like to say this is just going to go away. The flu doesn't just go away. It stays, it lasts forever. Every year we have a flu season. People die from the flu every single year. This is a virus too. COVID is a virus similar to the flu, as everybody says. It's contractual, contagious. So therefore, if we have another upswing in this come this fall with flu season, and then how do they compound the illnesses together? So can you have COVID and the flu at the same time. Now, if you have a combined flu happening, one in your respiratory system and then the flu in your autoimmune system or whatever it's called, because I'm not a doctor, I probably screwed that up, so don't give me a bunch of bad tweets. But I'm just saying, when you have both of them, how is your body going to be able to respond and react to that with fighting COVID and fighting the flu? That's a compound, infection. I don't think we've really even touched the surface of understanding or knowing, because we're just trying to still find a way to attack the straight single virus of COVID, not a combined one. And then how do they each mutate when your body does have them both in there? So, like John saying, there's so many unknowns, and I think, Dane, you might have said earlier, there's 10,000 questions and not very many answers. There's so much to think about going forward with this disease. And again, how does 80-man teams really pull it off? I mean, you see baseball with 25-man teams, but the other point I like to make is, in baseball, the Marlins had to miss 2 weeks of games because they got tested positive. How do you have the Saints as an organization maybe get enough positives, say 30 people or something, like, again, average out like what happened with the Marlins? Now that organization's got to sit for 2 weeks. So that means their opponents got the next two opponents got extra buys on their schedule. Now, how is that fair going into the playoff scenario and run? How's that going to factor in on who is the last man standing? Because, hey, it's not my fault. If I'm the Giants, it's not my fault the Saints and the Vikings this year had to be quarantined, and I got wins on them because they had to forfeit those games. But yet now, another team that missed the playoffs by one game and had to play all theirs, they're complaining they actually played more game, and I got forfeit games. In the scenarios, you can sit here and what if all day, but that's why it's so interesting that they are fired up to play, because I just don't know where the answers are. As Dane said, there's 10,000 questions, where the answers are to these questions.
And Dane, I wanted to take it from a little bit of a different angle, right? From the college football angle, because we talked about this yesterday, the potential of moving to spring with the uncertainty right now. But as John and David have talked about a little bit, second wave potentially, right? Like, we don't know exactly what the future holds with the virus. So do you think, just from your perspective, that maybe a spring push for most of college football would be the right answer, maybe the most advantageous decision to have a college football season?
I mean, yes, just kind of unequivocally, yes, because if nothing else, it buys everybody more time to get more information and be able to see what's working in baseball, what's working in basketball. Are there any parallels we can draw? I think any time that you can make a more informed decision is going to be better, for one. The other point is that we've already have at least 6 FCS conferences that have moved to the spring. Could be more. I may be missing some off the top of my head, but obviously NCAA with Division II and Division III, some of those programs are going to have to cancel their seasons, if not postponed to the spring. And then you have schools. You saw UConn yesterday be the first domino, and I think they will be the first domino, because I think you have programs like Independent New Mexico that's going to struggle finding enough opponents. They had a $2 million payday versus Texas A&M that got canceled when the SEC went conference only. Well, that $2 million pays most of the bills for the athletic department for New Mexico. So it's not like, oh, we just, have a bye week and that's the only ramification. No, there are serious financial ones. So I do think you're going to see even more FBS programs cancel their seasons altogether. And so I think that, to answer your question, Ryan, moving it to the spring, I think, despite the fact that we all know that there is no level playing field in college football, it would make it as level as possible while allowing everybody to have more time to better understand COVID, to see if we can come up with a vaccine, to see if we can lax, social gatherings. Maybe we can get more fans in attendance, because you have to remember, for all of our viewers, the NFL makes their money on TV. College football still largely makes it on ticket sales and revenue from in-person attendance at games. So that's not to be minimized, especially when you're looking at non-Power 5 schools.
Right, like butts and seats is big, especially for the lower level. And, not everybody's in Alabama, Auburn, and Michigan, and Notre Dame, where they have these SEC TV, Big Ten TV, huge deals. I think you nailed it right on the head. The butts and seats is so big for so many of these programs to get their revenue going that actually make money. I mean, I think that was a beautiful point there, Dane, because that's so true.
And I want to remind everybody, no matter if the season gets postponed, delayed, whatever it might be, NFL Draft Bible is here to stay. We just had our seminar last night with Brian Baldinger. We broke down some of the best wide receivers. 3 weeks from now, the tight end show, August 26th. If you want to sign up today, I would definitely recommend it. We'll be looking at guys like Tony Gonzalez, Shannon Sharp, some of the best of recent years, maybe some Rob Gronkowski. Also this Friday, myself and David Turner are going to be breaking down some interior defensive linemen, a part of our Friday night scout school. David, if you want to give them a little excerpt into what we've been covering there, just a little of a highlight for Friday night scout school.
Sure. Friday Night Scout School has been amazing so far. It's really been more than even I thought it would be. We've been able to, I think we have about 40 guys every week in the Zoom chat, in the room, in the seminar, and we went over the 43 defense, really broke down the schemes and how important it is to know the schemes. And we went into the 43 to the 4-2-5. Then the next week we went into the 34 defense, and trying to set up a base conversation, a cornerstone where we can build off of as we now get into player evaluations on what are our zero technique, how does it translate to the NFL and different schemes. Understanding the schemes and understanding your coach's scheme really will help you then go out and shop for the players that he needs you to bring into the building so he can be successful. And as a scout and as a scouting staff, you got to really support those coaches in their schemes to be successful. So now we're getting into the big hog malas, the big guys up front, and we're gonna eat some meatloaf, grade some interior guys. We're gonna do the zero technique, the 2-eye, the 3 and the 4-eye, just to get really that interior D-line covered. We're going to grade 4 players. We're going to send out homework assignments where you guys are going to write some scouting reports. I mean, this is an interactive scouting platform for everybody to really learn how to scout. And it, figure, one day maybe you're just an interior lineman that you want to know how you're getting scouted. So tune into this, order it a la carte, go to draftbible.com, pick this one class and just say, hey, how is the scout really grading me? Come watch. If you're a D-line coach and you always want to know what we're watching when we're sitting there, on film, come watch. If you're an agent that likes to represent D-linemen, come watch. High school coach, interested, come watch. It's really built for everybody who has a strong curiosity about scouting. Come participate. Take one class. If you're not hooked, then you know what? You only invested in one class.
Ryan and John, a wise man at the Raiders, told me when I first got there that until you know the league, you don't know how to evaluate college players. So, for me, sitting in there trying to learn from Dave Turner myself when I first got to Oakland, you know what? It's a great opportunity, especially if you're an agent. If you're trying to project players from the NCAA to the NFL, you need to understand what the NFL is looking for. And sometimes it can be as simple as body types and how you're physically going to fit into the scheme. Other times it's going to be your skill sets. Obviously, we know that for the cream of the crop, they're going to have both. They're going to have the different metrics everyone's looking for, from character to athleticism and explosion and size, length, etc. But until you understand what plays in the league, you're not going to have a full wealth of knowledge of how those guys in college are going to fit into those holes. So, you know what? I always think it's advantageous to learn scheme as much as you can, try and understand what's being asked of the guys and how they're performing. How are they producing? Because it's not just running backs and receivers that get stats, right? You need to look at D linemen and know, hey, is he doing his job and how well is he doing it? So I applaud you guys for doing that, man. I've been enjoying seeing some little snippets from it.
Absolutely. So like David said, we're going to be breaking down some of the guys who have already had success in the league. We're going to be taking a look at guys like DeForest Buckner coming out of Oregon, Quinnen Williams out of Alabama. We're going to be taking a look at Danny Shelton when he was coming out of Washington. So as Dane said, we're trying to lay the foundation for this is what it should look like. This is where the NFL valued these guys. When we take a look at this year's class, the 2021 cycle, when we get into it in a future episode, this is what an interior defensive lineman should look like. This is the responsibilities they have. This is how they fit into an odd man front. This is how they fit into an even man front. We're trying to understand the evaluation process through and through. So, again, I would really recommend that. And like David said, if you sign up for one, you don't like it, the show will go on. We appreciate you coming for the attendance for 1 week, definitely. Dane, I actually did want to stay with you though, because on that note, we're talking about scouting a little bit, and I'm going to kind of get John's perspective on it afterwards. We've been talking the last couple days, I should say, about how this is going to affect the scouting world. Obviously, with you being directly the scouting department with the NFLPA Bowl, I'm sure that this is kind of maybe made you reevaluate how you're going to go about some things early on in this process. So for you personally, or even just from a pure scouting perspective, how much has this thrown a wrench or made you really try to get creative with how you're going to evaluate this scouting process moving forward here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Al Saunders, the great offensive coach that I had the great fortune of working with at the Raiders for a few years, always said that the great ones adjust. So I think that everybody needs to get comfortable being uncomfortable and get prepared to not have as much information going into the season. And I think that's really our biggest adjustment right now is we don't have as much information as we typically would at this point in time. So then, okay, how are we going to adjust? How are we still going to be able to accomplish everything that we need to accomplish and get evaluated, everything we need to get evaluated? So to answer your question, we're going to focus a lot more on film study from home. This last week, I received 2 emails from Big Ten programs saying that as of now, scouts are not allowed in their facilities. And it wasn't them trying to be draconian or, to really keep everyone out. They were just letting the NFL community know that, hey, look, as of right now, we're still trying to figure it out ourselves. So I don't think that NCAA programs are going to want 32 NFL clubs, CFL clubs, all-star game clubs, your organizations going through their facilities, going from school to school to school to school, potentially bringing something with them. So it's definitely going to be an adjustment this year for everybody. Obviously, just like we're doing here with StreamYard, I think that the teleconference calls and even the video calls with coaching staffs are going to be very prominent this year in order to get background. As Dave and John and everyone that has gone into a school can tell you, though, you always have to read through the lines when you're talking with some sources at schools. Some are going to give you more forthright information than others. So as a scout, it's your job to really be able to dissect what they say and read a little between the lines. So it is going to be more difficult, I think, when you're not doing it in person. But, again, the great ones are going to adjust, and we're all going to have to adjust this year in order to obviously have, for us, the best all-star game we can, and for the NFL clubs and CFL clubs and everybody else to be able to still get all their evaluations done in an appropriate time frame.
And John, you being obviously in the front office of a professional football team, right? Like how is this process, this pandemic, this situation that we are dealing with, uncertainty, how much is it going to be important for any front office, for any team to be a close-knit community that has direct conversation, direct communication with one another on a consistent basis?
Well, I think you got to find out how to send virtual donuts and bagels, I guess. So you better figure out a way to get you there first and early, and bring something the staff will enjoy. So.
You're channeling your CO Picado right now. Get there early.
Get there early and bring them a snack. So and then show back up in the afternoon with something, and they'll remember you the next time.
Pizza,
but
maybe.
The craziest part is. And I think it'll be a lot of the same, when doing the All-Star games, you have your initial idea of, hey, like this could be my depth chart, and your opposing teams in the All-Star game circuit are the other bowl games. And so that's what you're competing against to say, like, that's my depth chart for my game. And then I have another group of guys that I'll draw from if I can't get that guy or he goes and plays in a different game. In this scenario, you're dealing with the roster you have, but not knowing if anybody's going to opt out or get sick or get hurt. So then you have, your secondary list of guys, but what if some of those guys don't want to play? You're potentially looking at going much further down the chart in an organization to say, like, hey, you could think you're good at a spot. 1 or 2 guys opt out, or 1 guy opts out and 2 guys get hurt. You're having to have I think a little different list, of guys, and some of that's not going to just be who's the best player. but it's going to be, who's in the best mindset, to be an adequate replacement immediately. What kind of guy with experience playing professional football who can put a lot of this stuff aside without you having to do that with them and guide them through that whole process of putting all this aside and be able to be an experienced guy that's gone to the AAF and dealt with stuff, or gone to the XFL and dealt with things, gotten cut in the NFL and stayed in shape for 3 weeks, and gotten another opportunity. It's really just going to be the long game of being able to say, yeah, everybody has still their top list or, their top depth chart, in their minds. That's easy. What teams and what people can kind of sit there and wade through all of that stuff and say, hey, I might have rather have had a few more big school guys in the past, but hey, you know what will really help stand out next year might be having that kid, from a D2 program, or having some NAIA kid that only 3 teams have looked at, but now you put him out there and you're helping the process, right? So most of the all-star game stuff, it's not just who you saw and moved up. It's who you were able to evaluate and kind of push to the side, and then a lot of that comes, with doing the groundwork, that they're talking about. And I think, again, you're having to, like we spoke about yesterday, developing and having those relationships where, that program or that football ops guy or that SID or strength and conditioning coach, he may be getting 100 phone calls this year instead of 100 visits. Are you going to be one of the phone calls he responds to? Because if not, you better email him, text message him, find him on Tinder, do whatever you got to do. But you better get yourself an answer, from that guy one way or the other, even if you have to catfish him a little bit.
Well, even Murph, you even know this. People aren't putting stuff in writing. Like, you really, let's just be honest. If every school would require the head coach, the coordinators, and the position coaches, strength coaches, and pro liaisons to sit down and write their notes on every guy and post it to like a common shared website, scouting would become a home job where you could have a lot of old veteran guys just sitting watching tape. But the reality is nobody wants to put things in writing. So therefore, that's why you have to get your butt to the school. You have to sit in front of them, take your notes, ask your questions, ask it from different sources so you can read between everybody's line to understand and figure out exactly what they're saying to you when they say, he's not the most aggressive guy in the world. Then you go next person. Yeah, I wouldn't call him soft, but right now you're starting to figure out what they're saying about the kid, whoever the kid is. Now, no one's going to do that in an email. No one's going to do that in a text. No one's going to do that. You got to get them on the phone. And you can get them in a Zoom call, but you got to make sure it's not being taped, because guess what? As soon as you tape a Zoom call with a guy, they're not getting back on the phone with you. You're done. You're dead. They're not doing it. They can't trust you. And that could screw up the whole room for the entire, whole season. So, it's going to be a very tricky year. Like, Dane, I know when you guys go out as NFLPA guys last year, I was talking to you and David at the game, and, you guys are still doing it how it's supposed to be done, as like Raider scouts would do it and normal, college scouts would do it. But now this year, to pick the right guys for the NFLPA Bowl, yeah, you can pick on their play, but, are they really the right guys that are going to translate to the NFL? And you don't know that.
That's the most difficult part, Dave, obviously, and I think that this year really is going to be a fascinating year as far as talent evaluation is concerned. What about for the players who opt out and don't have a final season for NFL teams to evaluate? Now you're going back on 2 year ago film. Obviously, the fortunate thing is that we all have 2019 film that we can go back and evaluate. But as we all know, your final season of college can be a make or break year for you. It can really be an opportunity for you to elevate. Some of these guys whose seasons are being canceled or postponed or who are opting out may have been playing behind a draft pick last year. So they didn't really get an opportunity to shine necessarily. And this would have been that platform for them to show what they're capable of doing. So, there are so many elements to this thing. Again, like we started off with, 10,000 questions, no answers. But ultimately, Dave, that was kind of why I thought that we did such a great job last year. Pardon me for patting myself on the back, was that we did get out on the road. We did go to the schools. And in so doing, there are so many advantages, as you guys know, right? I mean, going and talking to guys. We heard, hey, you better get out to Washburn University. There's an offensive tackle over there. Well, it wasn't on the preseason list to evaluate. And so I was able to get some film, go make the drive out to Washburn and Topeka. And I fell in love with Kyle Hinton. Came out, we invited him to our game, ended up getting drafted by the Minnesota Vikings. So, there are a lot of advantages, not only from talking to the school sources, but just having boots on the ground that are collecting valuable intel, collecting valuable information from all of our counterparts, from our colleagues, from other clubs, et cetera, that make the scouting process really a collective thing, not just an individual thing, like Dave said, of some guys sitting at home on the couch just grinding out tape. Now, unfortunately, again, we're going to primarily be doing the tape, but we have to supplement that because the character and the background is so important. And it's paramount for NFL clubs to understand who they're bringing into their locker room. Same with the CFL clubs and everyone else, right? You need to understand, just like we're talking scheme with the Friday night scout shows, right? You need to understand what's playing in the NFL so that you can project. Well, I need to know what my locker room's comprised of so that I can figure out what are these new personalities, these different cultures that I'm potentially going to be drafting and therefore signing off on and inserting into that locker room afterwards. So, there's a lot of valuable information that still needs to be ascertained outside of just a preseason list.
Well, I think that's a fantastic point right there. Honestly, it's one we hit on in Friday Night Scout School, and I think our introduction show was that building the character of the team and not messing up the culture in the locker room is a key factor to scouting. And knowing, if you have a guy who is a very tough coach, and this guy's going to be a coach toughly, can he come into your building and be successful? And it might not be possible. And then also, if you got a guy who's kind of a prick, excuse the term, but if he is, can your coaching staff, can your culture in your locker room, can your veterans handle that? Or is he going to be the alpha that messes up the room? I know when we were at the Raiders, we had, about 4 or 5 alphas that, like Warren Sapp and stuff, that if the locker room got out of line, they corrected it and they took it over so that the coaches didn't even have to really get involved too much. Is your locker room strong enough to handle that? Or if you bring in a guy that's kind of a negative ninny, is he going to affect the whole locker room and mess up your winning culture? That's a great point. And without those kind of verified character temperatures, because, obviously we're not psychologists, but by doing this, 18-year, Dane, you were like somewhere in 15, 16 years, something like that. John, you're the same, we've been in it long enough to know that you got to do those temperature checks and bring that part of scouting, that trait of scouting into the room and say, I can trust this guy. He's a blue character guy, or he's a Raider guy, or he's a Alouettes type guy, whatever, and say, this is what we want to do. And this is who we want in our locker room to help lead our team and be here on game day for us, and be around in our community. We can trust that he's not going to go out drinking and driving and running red lights and crashing cars. We can trust that his family background and stability are going to help him make good decisions, which ultimately will help our sponsorships stick around because they want to be part of a good organization, which stabilizes the business, which makes the owners happy. There's a lot of things that go into team building, and Dane hit perfectly on the character and understanding the injury history and all that, and that makeup of the person, because we're investing in people. We're not just investing in a commodity like a shoe, build a better shoe, build a better wedge. It's not that. You're investing in people. And that's why it's so hard to build a winning culture, because every person is different. Everybody handles the stress of life and the stressors of life different. How do they react is going to be different. Something Gettleman always said, when I first started scouting, was grade 3 tapes, because you don't know what in his life was affecting his first tape. You don't know if that got corrected on the second tape, but by the third tape, you really know who the guy is. So if you're not grading a minimum of 3 tapes, then you're really not really understanding how the player is, and as he's going to play every week for you.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I actually want to stick there because, as David said, we talked about that in your introductory to Friday Night Scout School. Every interview I've heard David do with the ANC Combines when he's talking to players, he's talking about, what type of person is the organization getting, not just a football player. When I do the interviews for Marvin Jones Free Agency Database, a part of this NFL Draft Bible free agency experience, when I do the interviews, I also ask the same question. What type of person is this organization getting, not just a football player? So, John, from that perspective, how much does that go into the evaluation process, and how much, as Dane kind of talked about and David talked about a little bit, how much does that handicap this scouting off season, right? When we're usually on the road, you can get face-to-face with the guys, you can ask them questions, you can get a feel for what type of person they are. How much does that make this process even more difficult right now?
Well, like I said, I think two things you're going to do. One is that if you have experienced people in your organization that that if they're sitting there and they're watching somebody, or if you're saying, so what do you think of this guy, that they have a background to say after a short period of time, hey, I can give you an example of. Because if you've been around it enough, you can give an example of somebody who, well, he's not a great guy. Well, give me an example. Well, he can be a little, okay, well, give me an example. So it's not always just the physical example of comparing the last 6'4" wide receiver to another 6'4" receiver in the next draft. It's saying like, hey, is it dealing with somebody who has a personality every once in a while? Is it dealing with somebody, hey, he's always going to have kind of something off the field, but it's not negative. It's just he's always involved in something. They tell you, well, he's always going to talk in a locker room. Okay, well, like locker room lawyer guy, or somebody who's always in other people's business. Or is he the first, or do you mean he's the first guy to kind of rally and jump in, which can be a good thing? So if you have experienced people who can give you those examples, who can take whatever amount of information, like Dane is saying, do you have enough now? Well, no, because we mentioned it. A lot of these guys are going to have estimates next to their height, weight, and 40, which means a lot of schools, or a lot of those, small school guys or guys that would be JUCO transfers that got hurt or had academic issues last year, might be in a second or third program, are going to be, just kind of sitting there with no grade or an undraftable grade. Doesn't mean they're not, guys that we could have looked at, in a different way. Has everybody gotten to Lenore Ryan, last spring? Has everybody gotten to Ferris State? Has everybody gotten to Azusa Pacific? No, and highly unlikely. But if that's the truth, guess what? There's somebody in the draft the last 3 years from all of those places who's going to be the teams that can grind through that and find that information out, and get those things, that you're looking for, and to backtrack, to what they were talking about earlier. You go all the way back. I mean, that was, pretty much at the beginning of when the Niners turned the corner, was Bill Walsh saying, hey, I as a coach am telling you, if you make the mistake of just looking at somebody and saying, the coach told me this, the coach said that, the program said this about him, the program doesn't think whatever. He's like, well, guess what? We're in the business of grading the player. So now if you're just taking those coaches' word on why he didn't fit the scheme, or why he wasn't as productive, or why the sophomore year looked different than the junior year, well then, hey, I'm going to have to go back and now start grading those coaches to know, are they worth a damn to be telling me what they're telling me? So a lot of times, the process of saying, like, did you know what that guy was being asked to do on those plays, on that down and distance, for that specific program in the scheme that they were using? Because his best reference was saying the year after Fred Dean retired, they were still looking for pass rushers. And one of the guys' film that they didn't bring him initially was a guy from James Madison who didn't look like an NFL player, and it was Charles Haley.
Yeah.
And Bill Walsh is like, I watched 3 plays of this guy, paused it, brought all those people in the room, and said, now, can somebody explain to me why this is the first time that I'm evaluating this player? He's not on our board. He's not thought of in this way. And then read him the riot act over the factor of, so you're listening to a school tell us he's not an NFL guy because he doesn't have an NFL position. He's undersized. He can't do this. He can't do that. And then puts on the 3 plays he watched and goes, but the motherfucker, he sure the hell can pass rush. Like he sure the heck can do this. And this is the one trait that we're saying we're looking for somebody, is to do that one trait. But yet we were considering not giving this film, not the player, we were not giving this film, its rightful due, because we took the word that the coach said, you weren't letting your own eyes tell you what you were seeing. To then go back and say, okay, coach, why weren't you using them like this? Or what can you do with somebody, as opposed to just taking the word of, well, he can't do it, no reason to watch it. And I think that's going to be very crucial, that if you don't get that one-on-one stuff, and we talked about how it could be very different at the combine, right? You could be at the combine doing your interviews just like this if they tell you that you can't have all those people in the room together. So you might be allowed to have your Dane Vanner or your David Turner guy and a defensive line coach, but you're not going to get all the eyes and ears, and that's one of the things that we've tried to do, anywhere I've been, is always give somebody a different vantage point to listen to the interview. So some of the times the person that I'll listen to the most afterwards is not the person asking the questions. It's the other guy sitting over there just listening to the answers and how the kid is responding. And when you ask the questions in the interview is not numerically ordered in there. It's normally based off of the reaction that the kid is giving you to some of the questions you ask. Because if he's trying to just kind of get out of a scenario, about, well, no, tell me, really, what do you think about first thing in the morning? And he tries to give you generic, and you try to bring him back to get a real answer. The same way if he talks about his family but really doesn't want to go into much detail, you've got to try to come back around to it at a later time or date, to try to see, well, how can I get him to open up a little differently, or, give me a little bit different, answer to things. Because, if you keep asking guys the same question long enough, the thing about, well, how come you guys win 10 games a year and then lose in the bowl game every year? Eventually they'll come out and say, well, the coaches don't have us prepared. And then he'll kill you if you ever have him in your building. But they're not going to come out and say that right off the bat.
I love that you brought up Bill
Eventually they'll come around. Most of them come around and give you an answer, that's good or bad, but they will give you that answer. And the positive thing for the kid is, a lot of people, some people just let you go off the cliff, and thanks for it. But other people will then, when the taping's done, when the interview is over, bring a kid on the side and say, hey, look, you have every right to possibly feel that way. However, if you want to have a long road in this, I would find a different answer to the factor that your production is down in these big games, and not pointed at the, at the coaches, not pointed at the program or the situation, because, it doesn't make sense for you to have all these tackles and tackles for loss, but then all these good teams, you look like this, or vice versa. Have all these great stats against Alabama, LSU, but I'm showing you Vanderbilt and Kentucky, and you're there playing like I am. So you do have time to interact with the kid and a prospect, and kind of share that, so that he doesn't take that and just mush himself into the ground, with it. But like I said, that's the biggest part of it, is anytime I've gone anywhere, once I've gotten to a point where you are part of the decision maker, shoot, the first or second time I try to show up in front of somebody, I'm trying to do it as casual as humanly possible, because I'm going to get who that person is for real in those environments. And then if you show up later on and they're like, oh, wow, that's who you are, you're going to get a very different answer and response. But if you can see that it changed, then there's some more research to do. If the player or the coach or the agent responding to you gives you the same, same answer or the same type of answer whether you're on the phone with them at an all-star game, at the combine, or doing a follow-up, you'll then see that you're on the right track with that player to getting the information that you need. And I think it's just like Dave has mentioned, you're going to have to grind old school, to get this same stuff done, because we're not going to get as much information, just easy shorthand like we normally would.
Yeah, and a lot of great points.
If I may, sorry, Ryan, but I was just going to kind of respond with 2 points on that. One, and I'm going to sound like a personnel guy here, but not all coaches are equal. And I don't mean that necessarily in a terrible way. I'm going to try and put a positive spin on it. And I'll say that in my experience, that some coaches do a much better job of incorporating a player's unique talents into what they do. Dave made the great point earlier in the show that, hey, you know what, our job as personnel guys is to understand, generally speaking, what we're looking for, the schemes we're trying to run, and then to go out and go get those groceries so they can cook the meal, right? So we do, there is a fine line there, right? But at the same time, if you have a unique skill set for a certain player, you need to be able to exploit that. And to just, putting them into the same thing or asking him to do something that is not his strong point and not allowing him to do something that is his strong point is a detriment to your football team. So some coaches do a much better job of utilizing the unique skill sets of their players than other coaches do. When it comes to draft evaluations too, I've found that some coaches do a better job of studying film and doing their own kind of background, while others, make a couple phone calls and take somebody else's opinion rather than doing the work themselves. So, you do get better coaches that are better evaluators, or who at least will sit there and say, hey, look, you guys have been watching them for a couple years. I just threw on 4 games, so you guys know the player better, but here's what I see. So there are different approaches when it comes to incorporating players and evaluating players onto your team. The other point I was going to make when we're talking about players' character, was that I'm okay inviting guys, especially to our all-star game, that have some question marks, right? This is part of the process. People make mistakes. Guys do, immature things when you're 18, when you're 19, when you're 20 years old. My question is, are you going to be a mistake repeater? And that, to me, is part of the real value of all-star game type settings, is because typically from an NFL talent evaluator standpoint, it's my first opportunity largely to speak with a guy one-on-one and hear his version of events. Hey, look, I heard you were suspended last year for 2 games. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Hey, I saw that you missed the second half of the season when you were a freshman to an injury. Can you fill me in and fill in some of the information gaps I have? Hey, you know what? I heard, you had an arrest for something. Can you give me some background on that? Obviously, not every player has negative background information to uncover, but the all-star games are a great opportunity for NFL teams to hear the player out, to get their perspective on it, and then to ultimately try to determine, hey, has this player learned from it, or is he going to be a mistake repeater? That's a big part of the equation, So I don't shy away necessarily from certain backgrounds demerits, but, because it's all part of the process.
Yeah, and I love how, Murphy, you brought up Bill Walsh, because Bill has 2 things that I always carry with me. One is, if a guy's a first-year starter, you got to look backwards and figure out, why was he a 1-year starter? If the guy that played in front of him was Ricky Williams, now you get it. Okay, that's why Priest Holmes never played. But if a guy couldn't beat out, the guy in front of him, and that guy in front of him didn't have the right measurables, didn't play in the NFL, might be retired after college, never had even a cup of coffee in the NFL, and now this stud of a player walks on the field, and you're like, oh, where's this guy been? Well, he couldn't beat out the guy before. Now that starts raising more questions of, what's his weight room ethic? What's his off-season eating habits? Where did he have some stuff? I remember Antonio Pierce, his senior year, didn't have a good senior year, right? But his junior year was really a gangbusters. Well, people didn't realize that his parents had passed away, and he was taking care of his sister, going through high school his senior year. So he was struggling just to like kind of figure his life out and do things. Goes to the Redskins. We wind up signing him as a free agent to the Giants. And, now AP is AP. He's a very successful person. He's not a mistake maker and all, but you have to learn that story because again, we're invested in people and you have to learn his character of what he's going through, what that road looks like every day for him. And, what challenges he has off the field to make sure you understand how it's equating to his play on the field. And the second one for Bill Walsh, when he was interviewing players, if a player didn't talk about their father or a father figure within the first 5 minutes, he said he didn't want to have them because he really wants that strong male role model for men in the home, not saying anything negative about women, but again, having a man in that man's life, teaching that man the character and I don't want to call it masculinity, but what it takes to be a man walking in society. He wanted that for his locker room. That was a cultural stair stepper that or marker that he wanted for his room. You know what I mean? So Bill Walsh is again, for me, carries a few things that I always ring for in my head when I'm interviewing players, trying to figure out who they are, who their decision makers are, who the influences are in their life on how they're going to influence what they're doing and who they are and all that stuff. So that was really a cool moment, Murph, when you brought him up.
Yeah, I mean, look, we all know off of last year's college football season that while Joe Burrow gets the accolade or the number one pick in the draft, status and people say, well, where he was rated, at various times, leading into last spring and summer. I mean, just take an example. If we're at the same time last year with all this going on, Joe Burrow can still have the opportunity based off of what he had done right up to that point to still maybe not go number one overall, but be thought of in collaboration with those same quarterbacks that all would have needed last year to get over the hump. At this time last year, Clyde Edwards-Helaire has 689 yards, period, the end, and is stuck, in his LSU career with, Derek Geis, all kinds of different people in the mix. And at this time last year, they're worried, is he going to lose that job as a senior eventually to one of two freshmen? And on the flip side of the ball, sophomore and junior year, all Patrick Queen is a nice, athletic, undersized linebacker who's rotating, again, behind a bunch of really good All-American high school players and, high-end, production guys defensively. Now goes from his junior film, starting to get more reps toward the end of it, jumps on, and all of a sudden, not only is he producing stats, but now you're hearing the coaches and the players talk about his leadership. Now he's taken over for the guys that left, and that defense the first couple of weeks, they were outscoring folks, but they weren't playing great defense the first month of the season. And then you started hearing more about him, and then you hear more about him. And you're hearing as much about him off the field and from the coaches to then make you want to go watch this guy more, on his film to see the production. But you wanted to watch him because they were making a point to say, if you were going in there or you were following it up and asking about the seniors, who's the guy? Yeah, you heard of those names that were producing the highlight stats. But when you could hear the strength coach, a position coach, another person behind the scenes, the SID, when all the right people are pointing you in the direction and saying, man, I know it's Burrow and, man, you're scoring 40 a game, but what is it that's made this team different? And they're pointing you at a senior defensive player that at one point in time looked like a reserve backup late round or PFA type, and this kid all of a sudden turns into somebody that was then seen as moving into maybe a third round pick, seen as a day one, day two type guy. A lot of the metrics were the things that you wanted to hear about an upperclassman and how they became that guy from their sophomore, junior year to their senior year to then project that to say, now, this is not only a productive player I'm adding to my locker room, he's going to interact really well with my current vets, but I see that guy one day replacing one of those vets as a real dude. And then you see where he gets drafted, what team takes an opportunity to draft a guy like that, and all of it fits in to the puzzle piece to draw it back. But you're saying like, hey, those are two guys right there that if the metrics of this year were in place, do we all know about what's going on behind the scenes at LSU with Patrick Queen if we can't do all those interviews and all those, direct testing? And do you get Clyde Edwards-Helaire to jump out on film if they're only playing 10 games? If they're rotating, more guys in there last year, does that change the optics? That'll be really interesting to see if teams get squished to only playing an 8 or 10 game college season. Are they saving today for tomorrow? Are they prepping the guys that are going to have, 2 or 3 years left? Or are they riding it out with that guy who's been a program guy who you've seen a lot of program guys, once they're given their final opportunity, sometimes karma works in their direction and they get a big senior year. It'll be really interesting to see with a shortened schedule and none of those throwaway games that the major universities use, to help pump up the young players for playing time. It'll be real interesting to see how that plays out with this year's draft.
It's going to be very interesting to say the least. A ton of great points. We're a little over an hour now, so I'm going to invite the guys in a second to have their closing remarks, something to think about. Before I do, again, NFL Draft Bible this Friday night scout school, digging into interior defensive linemen with myself and David Turner. If you haven't signed up, make sure to do it today. Ryan at NFLDraftBible.com. Rick at NFLDraftBible.com. You can find me at Rise and Draft on Twitter as well. If you just want to jump in the DM, I will direct you to where you need to go to sign up for those seminars. Baldy's Breakdowns, next one, August 26th. We're bringing down tight ends, 9 o'clock Eastern time for all of these shows, by the way. Also, if you're an unsigned player that's out there that is listening, waiting for your opportunity, we're talking about a lot of opportunities about to be on the table for a lot of guys. Free agency database headed by Marvin Jones for the NFL Draft Bible. So feel free to reach out for that as well. I'm going to start with the first appearance from Dane Vandernet on the set this week. Dane, something to think about, a tip, what we should be looking forward to, anything at all to end this here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, appreciate you guys letting me come on here. I hope I get invited back. It's always good getting on here, talking ball and seeing some familiar faces. So first of all, appreciate you guys. The second thing is that hopefully we got a lot more information in the weeks to come. But until then, I know that all of us are just going to be grinding away, trying to get everything we can as far as, our ducks in a row, looking at the tape. Ryan loves seeing all the clips you're putting up on Twitter, man. I think everyone does a great job. So appreciate you guys. Hope everyone's out there being safe, wearing a mask. Let's get rid of this pandemic so we can all get back to normalcy as soon as possible.
Absolutely. A fall without football just doesn't feel right. Appreciate you, Dane, for coming on. It was happy to come back on tomorrow, man. Most definitely. David Turner, with your final remarks, my friend.
I just want to thank everybody for being here. It was like talking with old friends today. Seriously, it was great having John and Dane on here and catching up for all Raider days and everything. But for the viewers and the people that are looking, let's just stay focused on our health and focus on what's mattered right now. Let's just stay focused on moving forward with masks, distancing, and keeping everybody healthy with washing your hands and stuff. And again, like points that came up today, if you're a player that's looking for help evaluating either who you are as a player and what you should be thinking about for your future, or if you have a player with a unique story that you need to learn how to tell and say it in the right way that the decision makers really want to hear and make sure it's the information we need to make our decision. That's what Maverick Sports is all about. We're here to help you with your interview prepping, test taking, and selling yourself, marketing yourself to the next level. So go check out mavericksportsconsulting.com. Feel free to sign up for any of our services there. And Ryan, I can't wait till Friday night to teach some inside hog mollas, some pass rushes, and get going on the player evaluations with you on Friday Night Scout School.
Absolutely. It's a lot of fun every Friday. Me and David have some more news that's coming out soon, so make sure to keep an eye out for additional info dropping in the next few days. And in here with John Murphy, back again every single day. You're better than Rick, man. You're here every single day. What's something that you want to end this with?
Well, we'll find out today at 4 p.m. who's opting out. Hopefully all of us will still be opting in for tomorrow morning's show, and we'll give Rick a break. He only didn't show up because of hurricane status, cleaning out some branches. Hopefully he can get his internet back running, and hopefully he's not out in the doghouse too much longer, and rejoins us. But great to have everybody everybody else involved in it. And I think it's very important when you have possibilities of less information, we're providing opportunities to drive more information. So if you have that kind of background of different people, and what their, exploits are, and what their expertise are, those are the type of things that will allow the right players, to get an opportunity in an all-star game, allow the right players, like Dave's saying, if you have a question or you're in a situation, that would be maybe odd to yourself, it's not going to be odd to Dave. He's seen it all. He's been a part of it all for 20 years. So, you're in the right spot. If you're a college football player and you're looking for an opportunity, hey, I would feel free, speaking for Dane, to know that if somebody sends him film, he's going to watch it, so don't worry. Even if you're East West North Dakota State University, A&T, Southern, you could probably still get a shot, in the game. We saw that last year. I mean, I remember going over the guys, that they had on the list, and there was somebody from all levels. So, anytime you have something being run that's scout driven, that's a good sign for anything involved with pro football, because it means they're not afraid to go do that work. They're not afraid to bring the Washburn kid. They're not afraid to look at guys, from different places. So I think what this does, and a platform like this does, is allow the people that are looking for those answers to know there is a place that they can get them and find those. So I would implore people to stick around Friday night and listen to, Turner talk about fat guys, playing interior line, and listen to Ryan Roberts, listen to him talk about fat guys playing interior defensive line. And, and if you're a college football senior, junior, well, probably don't want the underclassmen contacting Dane, but hell, one day you'll be a senior. So contact Dane in advance, get your name on their board and get evaluated. And, hopefully tomorrow Rick will do half as good a job as you have, Ryan.
I appreciate that, John. Nice subtle backhand compliment in the beginning, and you end with a real compliment. I love it, man. So again, Rick Saratello back tomorrow. I'll be back. John Murphy, David Turner, Dane Vandernet signing off here, folks. Appreciate you all so much for taking a dive with us today. We hope to have you back tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern time. Thank you all.
Thank you.